church. You guys are a fine-looking congregation. My name is Doug Metzger, and welcome to Harvard. Welcome to the first annual Sound Education Festival and Conference. Well, this event brings together producers and hosts from all over the planet. The voices in this building right now, the engineers, the technicians, the producers, and the writers, together we teach for millions of hours a day. We are an unofficial university, and a large one, and we've just sprung into existence in a remarkably short period of time. And podcasting, educational podcasting and radio shows have suddenly become one of the main conduits to human learning. At this moment, our courses are being listened to during morning commutes and jogs, dog walkings and bathtub scrubbings and leaf rakings and goodness knows what else. And while we have all separately agonized over the smallest details of our projects, wave files and compression settings and fade outs and fade ins, we're here today because we are all a part of something. There is an incredible diversity of educators in this building today. We have faculty members who, in spite of their notoriously blocked up schedules, take time to produce educational audio shows for the general public. And we have some really particularly successful educational radio hosts whose organizations produce marvelous educational content for the general public on shoestring budgets and often merciless time frames. And most of all, maybe, we have independent educational podcasters like me, who are normally atomized and spread out all over the world, but have come together today to feel that they're a part of something bigger. So one night over this summer, Zach downstairs and I, who's doing the same thing, we were on a conference call. We live on opposite coasts. I live in California. He's here in Boston. And during our conference calls, we would often kind of degenerate into joint work sessions where we'd both be on the phone and we'd both be typing and kind of muttering under our breath and saying, I think I put that file over there, or, oh no, I deleted that. And so during one such silence that we had, he suddenly, in this spontaneous, buoyant optimism that he has, said, you know what, Doug? I think that the educational audio community is like my favorite community on the planet. And I don't think I said anything at the time. I probably just said, yeah, man, nice. But as the weeks and the months leading up to this event have passed, I've really come to agree with him because we have been continuously surprised at the generousness and the kindness and the open-mindedness of this community. Leading up to this event, we were a little bit worried that real radio people would be put off by our efforts as small podcasters, that they would kind of look down on us as independent producers with like pillows duct taped to our bedroom walls so that it sounds better when we record. But we were wrong. We were worried a little bit that the academic community would find the brevity and the concision and the reductiveness sometimes of educational podcasts not to do justice to the full width of their disciplines. But again, we were wrong. And I think we're here because we all understand that education needs a lot of different kinds of worker bees of all shapes and sizes and colors. So over the course of many panels and public talks that we attend over the course of this weekend, we're going to learn a lot. No one is going to be able to attend everything. You've probably opened your pamphlets and looked at the labyrinth of panels and public talks that are taking place. We have a skeleton crew of recorders who is doing their best to record every single event, and that way you'll have a takeaway from this. And as a team, we will continue to produce free educational content for the general public. I wanted to say, and Zach is saying the same thing right now downstairs, there's going to be a lot of different formats and styles for these public talks and presentations. Some of us are going to just make things up as we go along. Some of us are going to read from bullet points. Some of us are going to use slides. Some of us, maybe from the academic community, the humanities community particularly, will actually just read the papers that we've put together. And I wanted you all to know who are presenting or talking that all of those methods are totally welcome. You're not here because you're flashy celebrities, although some of you are, but you're mainly here because you're effective educators. And so whatever you can do to do your best, feel free to do that. Also, I heard that Dan Carlin the other day said that there is on the order of more than 500,000 podcasts out there right now, which is just dizzying. Here at this event, we have at least 140 people who are actively participating, plus other hosts and producers who have come from elsewhere. So we don't all know each other. And throughout this event, we are going to mispronounce each other's names. There's going to be some flubs. And when the general public gets here tomorrow, particularly, we are going to get asked questions that we have no idea how to answer. So let's try to help each other out throughout such events. Jitters and jet lag and the general disorientation that accompanies any conference aside, I think we're in for a fun weekend, because the granular matter that makes up educational audio and the way that we make our shows, there are details about these on the web, but they're folded into YouTube videos and blogs and bonus podcast episodes. But this weekend, on the other hand, is just wall-to-wall learning about becoming better at what we do. And I hope that each of you, over the course of the weekend, has at least one juncture where you feel like you can say, oh my God, that's so much easier than what I've been doing. I'm gonna do that. Or, oh man, that person is awesome. What's your number? Or maybe even, ooh, I'm gonna steal that. I hope that all of that happens at least once. We're here to get to know one another, to make friends, and to step out from the sometimes lonely world behind the microphone and celebrate the work that we have done. Because in an era of disquieting political polarization and amnesia toward history, educational audio asks us to step out from the familiar corridors of our thoughts and opinions and learn new stuff. And while the optimism that we have individually is going to vary from person to person about the work that we do, I think everybody in this building right now feels that we're probably doing more good than harm. So thanks again for coming to our event and all the hard work that you do. And I want to introduce our morning keynote, Dan Cohen. Dan is a history professor at Northeastern University who has published widely on education and digital media. As Dean of the Libraries and Vice Provost for Information Collaboration at Northeastern University, Dan has been a proponent of the digitization and the democratization of academic and historical information for a long time. Having served as the Executive Director of the Digital Public Library of America, Dan spearheaded a broad-reaching effort to collect and warehouse information from American libraries and museums and archives, and to make this information available for free. And Dan also hosts a podcast called What's New. I just heard his most recent episode on the chemistry of nanosensors that can scan the human body, and it was accessible even to a doofus English major like me. So he's doing good work there. For all these reasons, we're really happy to have him open our event. The title of Dan's talk is Bridging the Academic-Public Divide Through Podcasts. I'll turn it over to you. Thanks.
Thanks for that kind introduction, Doug. And I just want to thank Doug and Zach and the many other, it sounds like dozens of other people who have helped to put together this conference. I've always found podcasting, I had a prior podcast starting in 2007 before What's New called Digital Campus, which we just put together by the seat of our pants. And I've always found that DIY sort of punk way of going about putting audio together to be attractive. A lot of what I do in my job is much more formal. I usually wear a tie. I'm not wearing a tie today, but it shows that there's really an opportunity here to put together incredible audio around education. And I want to talk today a little bit about that and the permeability between the academy and the outside world. But first of all, I want to take a moment to be happy to be in Andover Hall. I think a lot of people don't know that I actually received a master's degree in theological studies from Harvard Divinity School many years ago. It's great to be back. It's great to feel the spirit of studying religion, which I always found to be about obviously the biggest problems, the biggest truths, so many of them really unanswerable, and we can approach those higher truths but maybe not ever attain them. And it really, studying in this hall reminded me, and I think should remind us here at the beginning of the day, about the incompleteness of human knowledge and the fallibility of human knowledge. And I won't say more about that other than to say I actually think it's directly related to what I want to talk about today, which is the way we do communicate academic knowledge. The fallibility and the way that we as professors and educators and researchers communicate our work is not in this fallible way. It's, especially to the outside world, it is communicated in other ways. Our formal communications take other forms that are, shall we say, braggadocious. They take the shape of the monograph or the academic article, and those kinds of formats are specifically formatted. They are specifically given scholarly apparatus like the footnote to dress to impress, and they're dressed to impress our peers. That is, in fact, the point. Much of my academic work has been written in such a way as to impress my peers. I'll be frank about that. It relates to other things, but obviously it relates to the way we go about getting tenure, the way we communicate these things, again, is in formal structures that have abstracts and bibliographies and pointers and data and visualizations. These things are understood. They're dressed to impress one's peers. And then on the other side of the academic house, farther south from us right now, there's a university communications department and a very important part of the university. The university communications office is, of course, intent upon impressing the outside world. So they have other formats like the press release or the article, the sort of glossy magazine article, that are intended to receive coverage beyond the walls of academia. And those also have a structure to them. If you've ever read a university communications press release, they're written in a very narrow lane. They are crowded with spunky, crafted quotations that come from a world in which everything is a breakthrough. So we know about these formats, and I'll stop talking about them here. We're here for podcasts, but I just want to highlight here at the start the formats that we're used to in the university. I've been in the academy, with the exception of my years at a nonprofit, the Digital Public Library of America that Doug mentioned. I've spent my life in the academy, and I'm extremely familiar with these formats. They're comfortable to me. I can pick up a book and make my way through it, read the introduction, look at the notes, get a really quick grasp of what is going on in a book or an article. My colleagues are the same. So what those are genres. I want to talk about genres here. The press release and the academic article and the monograph may be about scholarly research, but they are, in fact, distinct genres. And I want you today and this weekend to think about your podcast in terms of its genre. Genres are actually incredibly helpful structures. They are commonly agreed upon forms of communication that provide identifying signals to the audience about what they're reading or viewing, or in the case of podcasts, listening to. Genres give the audience, often unconsciously and rapidly, a general category for creative work, which in turn colors its reception. Genres prep the podcaster's listener's ears and mind through repetition, recognition, and expectation. Those same words that I talked about with the academic article, or the way I pick up a history book. Repetition, recognition, and expectation. I know something's coming at the beginning, something's coming at the end, there'll be things in the footnotes. Conforming to a genre telegraphs structural information to the audience and makes audio more palatable and relatable. So you can think here about podcast elements like intro and outro music. Those are genre building. They orient the listener, who after all might be tuning in for the first time, and communicate what kind of audio stream this is. So this conference is about podcasts, but there can be, and indeed are, many genres of podcasts. Thankfully, podcasts no longer occupy the vast spectrum between 2 white guys talking about technology and 3 white guys talking about technology. This conference represents, as Doug just mentioned, is actually, I think, a really beneficial and quite wonderful flourishing of podcast genres. So now I want to talk about these kinds of genres, the kinds of genres that academic work works well in, and that can take maximum advantage of the medium while having the maximum impact outside the academy. So let's talk here about how to situate academic and educational podcasts within the galaxy of potential podcast genres. I think here, and I think as a historian, it's always helpful to look back just a little bit, and I know that my colleague Liz downstairs is doing the same thing right now, but going a little farther back to the age of radio. I want to look back at the beginning of the web and the forms of internet communication that flourished early on. It's still a young medium, only about 3 decades old. And since the advent of the web and its ability to serve a wide array of texts in different lengths and sizes and contexts, we have in fact seen the birth of new genres of writing, and new genres that in fact challenge traditional writing, especially in those formats I just mentioned that come out of the academy, and break out of the constraints, especially of print publication. Take the blog. Originally, it began literally as a web log for the older people in the room. People remember going to the Netscape homepage and literally seeing a list of links. And then, of course, in platforms like LiveJournal, it kind of morphed into a diary place and a place for personal musings. And then platforms emerged out of this early blog format, this weblog format, movable type, and then WordPress, that really did in fact act as platforms that were flexible, but were recognizable as genres because they all had reverse chronological, largely textual material and accommodated posts of a certain length. Because it lived on the web and given these origins, the blog was colonized by a less formal, more free-form style. And that beneficially allowed academics who adopted the blog to loosen up a bit. A moment ago, I used the word braggadocious. I have to say I've never used that word in an academic article that I'm aware of. I would feel uncomfortable using that word, in fact, in formal academic communication. But I've owned the domain name dancohen.org for 20 years. And if I want to drop a braggadocious or two at dancohen.org on my blog, I will go ahead and do that. And you can't do anything about it, and I have tenure at this point, so thank you. More seriously, the genre of the blog didn't and still hasn't lined up with the strict structures needed for the peer-reviewed article. It still is very bad at doing things like footnoting. Or having marginalia. It doesn't line up with other aspects of academia. So the article and the book still provide a sort of final, formal genre for academic research, but they don't accommodate well, or often at all, the detailed day-to-day research process. I want to underline this word for you. The day-to-day academic research process that led up to the book or article. Indeed, most academic writing involves obscuring those processes. Thank you for the recognition. It does. I think academics in the audience recognize this process. When we get to the article or the book, the hand-waving begins, the purple curtain is drawn, we start losing those informal words, and we start building that structure, that genre that we recognize as the article or the academic monograph. But the blog, this new genre that emerged as part of the web, excels in extraordinarily helpful ways in portraying the academic process. And so we actually now have a distinct genre of academic blog that I love, which I call the process blog. that emerge out of these platforms. For instance, one of the blogs that I subscribe to right now, and I've got a big RSS reader still, I'm probably one of the few remaining people who looks at an RSS reader, but I subscribe to a blog of a particle physicist who is doing a daily report on building a fusion reactor. And every day he just posts a photograph of the electronics that they're hooking up, or the metal tubing, or the computer systems, and just explains it. Like, I'm excited about this thing. Look at this cool tool. And it's an amazing process to see happen that will never, ever end up in an academic article that he will submit for formal reasons. But it is extraordinarily cool. And it, in fact, shows the rudiments, the basics of his academic subject. How do you get two tiny particles to line up from opposite ends and hit each other? And he talks about the need for, really having a lot of screws and bolts so that these pipes are lined up exactly right, and all of those elements that go into that process that you don't normally hear. The blog has provided an outlet for that. The same way, I have colleagues who blog in history about the ups and downs of archival research. Again, day to day, the finds, the drudgery. There's a lot of drudgery to looking through archives when you're writing a history book, the thousands of hours of research, the late night written stops and starts, the self-doubt. Those sentiments cannot come out except maybe in a tiny little print in the acknowledgement section of a book or the introduction of a book. They can't come out in the formal genre of the monograph or the article, but they can be revealed in a blog. And critically, they can enrich and humanize academic work in a way that is recognizable and relatable to the outside world. Like a good movie, a successful article or book also leaves on the cutting room floor dozens of other great scenes, half-baked but still quite tasty thoughts that don't make their way into a book project, a swirl of evidence that has to, by necessity, be streamlined, again, into these recognizable, peer-reviewed formats. Blogging can be a powerful way to expose these notes from a field, to show ongoing glosses about one's research that can fascinate the wider world in a way that a structured academic book or article cannot. So I've talked about the blog, and I'm sure the gears are already moving in your mind about the ways that much of what I talked about, process, day-to-day work, the insights, the stops and starts, translate extraordinarily well to podcasts in a way much better than the blog for reasons I'll now enumerate. Podcasts are wonderful ways to communicate the complex processes involved in acquiring new knowledge and how to pass it on to students and to show those bumps along the roads, the processes, the heartache, the excitement. Doug mentioned I did a podcast last week with an incredible young biochemist and engineer who is creating nanosensors. This is straight out of science fiction when you think about it. She is creating these tiny little nanoparticles that go into the bloodstream, and they roam around like robots. And when they find a specific molecule like lithium or sodium, they light up, they fluoresce, and then she has a tattoo that she puts on your skin. And as that nanosensor goes underneath, it fluoresces, and the tattoo picks up that fluorescence and communicates to her computer that you have X amount of lithium or calcium or sodium in your bloodstream. That is pretty cool. Now, she has articles that in preparation for this podcast, I always, because I'm a good historian, I like to read it all, so I always take the time to go into depth. I did not understand a single word of these articles. But I got her into our podcasting studio, and the first thing I wanted to know, which she just did such a wonderful job on, is like, I've heard nanotechnology in the newspaper. I've seen those braggadocious press releases, but like, what is it? How do you do nanotechnology? Like, talk to me. You go in at 9 a.m. into your lab. What are you doing? And she said the most remarkable thing in response to that question. She said, you know what? It's actually exactly like making salad dressing. She said, you've got these things. You've got like oily bits, and you've got your salt and pepper over here. And we literally put them in a beaker, and we mix around these oily bits, and we kind of shake it around and, you know, stir it around a bit, and then we wait a little bit, and it kind of emulsifies, and then we pour it over things, and it hardens, and you just pull these things out. And so she was just walking through for the first time, frankly, that I have no idea how you make these tiny little particles. It turns out it's like making salad dressing. That is a great story. It is not, again, in her article. It's assumed in her article that everyone who reads her articles will understand that process. They've done it themselves. But it is not something, actually, that the wider public ever hears, and that we do a very poor job in the academy communicating outside our walls. I had another guest last season on What's New, Dietmar Offenhuber, who has a very academic pursuit that will seem remote. He likes to study how trash circulates through cities, which I actually think is really interesting. He has a monograph on it. It has lots of social theory about the hidden aspects of the city. It's a wonderful book, but it definitely has a kind of academic structure. Got him in the studio, just asked, how do you track how trash circulates through the city? And he said, well, I got a couple hundred GPS devices and threw them in trash bins all around the city of Boston, and then hooked up my computer, and all of a sudden, look at this graph. You could see all these things moving, and then they get on a boat, and they go to China, and they go over here to Brazil, and I learned all these things. And he just walked through that process in a way, again, that was humanizing, that was fascinating, and that doesn't relate to urban studies or informatics or these kinds of things, but that is really about his work on a day-to-day basis. Podcasts can also frame academic expertise in a way that can thrill an audience. Just mentioned a couple of examples that way. I always like quoting Teller, who is the shorter, quieter magician in Penn and Teller. And he does speak, and when he speaks, when people ask him about magic, he always raises this point, which is that a big part, a central part of what makes magic, what makes magic what it is that magicians will spend a ridiculous amount of time practicing something. They will practice a specific skill, like bouncing a ball through a hoop, for hundreds and hundreds of hours, more hours than the audience believes is actually possible. They will get so good at something that it seems magical, and that actually it just relates to Teller literally practicing 10 or 12 or 18 hours a day on a new trick. It's more time than seems humanly possible. I think by this definition, there's a lot of magic in academia. Our colleagues spend years and even decades decoding ancient papyri, trying to solve fantastically complex mathematical theorems, or tracking down the smallest bits of evidence in the archive, or assembling the largest data sets known to man. Audio done well can display what is, let's be frank about it, obsession. It's a parallel obsession to Teller's obsession. This obsession of academics' audience, this willingness to put in the time. And I think as Teller notes, whenever he talks about this in the end of the story, he notes that revealing how a magic trick is done, actually telling the audience, which they do in their Las Vegas show, this is how this trick was done, which is by grit and practice and sheer will, actually enhances the experience from the audience. They still find it magical, and they're wowed in a kind of bigger way, a more appreciative way. It doesn't dissipate the magic, but it enhances it. doing that on our podcast as well is important. I had a podcast guest last fall, Ellen Cushman, who is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, but didn't grow up speaking the Cherokee language. And the Cherokee language is down to, there's only about 1,500 fluent speakers of the Cherokee language now in this country. And she decided that she needed to go and learn the language. She went to the reservation in Oklahoma. She spent years picking up a very, very complicated language, which she then spoke to us on the podcast. So just sort of vocalize what Cherokee sounds like. But Ellen took it a step further as an academic. She decided that she needed to go back and trace and find every single document written in Cherokee in the early 19th century, because it turns out that the Cherokee language was one of the few languages that we know about, that we have access to today, that made the transition from a purely oral form to a written form. That happened in the 19th century. Not so long ago, Cherokee, which was just spoken among hundreds of thousands of people, one person came up with an alphabet of 85 letters, not Latin characters, but new characters, set things, the Bible, other documents that the community wanted into this language. And Ellen decided she needed to spend years and now decades tracking down this process of how a language goes from this oral form to a written form and what happens during that process. That is magical. And she will spend a tremendous amount of time. In our library at Northeastern, we have a digital project that is scanning these documents and showing them in parallel. That's tremendous and magical. Finally, and I think most importantly, podcasts can portray the reality of academic work and inculcate appreciation of it better than written formats, including the blog, because of the nature of audio. And of course, we're here today to talk about what's special about audio. And for me, hearing academics, there is something unique about the human voice that we should recognize here at the beginning of the day. You know, my wife is a developmental psychologist. We talk about babies a lot in our household, and she will always note that babies, one of the first things they do is differentiate the human voice, obviously particularly the mother's voice and the father's voice, from all other sounds in the young child's universe. The human voice is special. We respond in different emotional ways to voices than to the written word. We are the most social of animals, and we're incredibly adept at picking up very subtle cues from the human voice: excitement, nervousness, ambivalence, assurance. All of us here have listened to podcasts. I'm sure you have had moments where if you read the transcript to the podcast, you would not have picked up certain of those social and emotional cues as you would when you actually listen to the podcast while walking your dog. The human voice also communicates one's humanity to the listener in a way that most academic writing has enormous trouble with. I think we should admit that. And indeed, those academic structures, those genres that I started my talk with, were really never set up to communicate our humanity. They were there to communicate our knowledge to our peers and to a network of knowledge and to the future. But it's a good time to think about communicating that humanity, setting up the right type of voice, not the know-it-all voice, but the voice that is cautious and thoughtful, the voice that's actually there when you are doing academic research. It's a different voice, and it's a voice that until we had this great flourishing of podcasts, you probably would not have heard. Podcasts are often criticized as raw or unedited, but I think they can actually take advantage of that rawness and the lack of edits and the ums and the ahs. That is helpful because it combines the expertise of academics with the informality of extemporaneous speech. That's what we hear on educational podcasts. Done well, educational podcasts as a whole The range of podcasts represented here today, it's 140 podcasts. They can foster audiences that may not always agree with us or research or conclusions. But these are audiences that can grasp much more deeply the very human pursuits of the Academy and how those pursuits relate to their lives. In his recent book, How to Think, about how to talk across our current social and political divide, the literary scholar Alan Jacobs calls on us to foster what he calls like-hearted rather than like-minded audiences. Like-hearted, not like-minded audiences. We shouldn't be asking everyone to always agree with us or set up audio streams that are just convince, convince, convince. That shouldn't be the goal. Instead, we're cultivating as a group a receptivity to academic work, receptivity to the subject matter of what we do, the relatability, and the hard work and the starts and stops that happen beyond our formal writing or the University Communications Department press releases. Podcasts finally give us the opportunity to show the humanity, the humanness of academic practice, something that significant portions of the public has lost sight of. Your podcast can be an important addition to this humanizing goal. One more step in expanding the audience of curious listeners and the population of the like-hearted. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Dan. And now I would like to welcome Diane Moore, who knows her way around here well. Diane is a professor here at Harvard Divinity School, and she is actually the reason why we're all here. Over the course of her career, Diane has promoted education about religion, having founded the Religious Literacy Project here at HDS. As a senior fellow at the Center for the Study of World Religions, and through her publications and through numerous other roles in educational organizations, Diane has long been in support of more detailed and substantive education about religions, both at universities and K-12 schools. As a firm believer that education and scholarship don't just belong on college campuses, Diane also teaches a self-paced MOOC through Harvard X on the history and scriptures of major world religions. Her presentation is titled, "The Importance of Critical Education in These Critical Times." And Diane, on behalf of everyone here, thank you so much for opening the doors of your campus to the professionals and riffraff of educational audio.
Thank you very much for that generous introduction. But I also just want to say, as I said earlier in the earlier session, Zach Davis is the reason you're all here. It's not about me. So if we can just give him a hand. It is my incredible privilege to welcome you to Harvard Divinity School on behalf of the dean and the faculty, the students, and the staff here. We're enormously grateful for your presence here and feel very honored that you have taken time out to be with us. Now, some of you may be wondering, maybe all of you wondering, what am I doing here at a divinity school? Like, what does that have to do with what I do? And especially those of you who ended up here in the chapel, right? You're probably like, okay, this is like all your associations with religion. Let me say, and I hope by the end of my comments that three things will be clear. The first is that we have a lot in common. What you all are doing as podcasters, as artists, and what we're trying to do here as academics and as educators, I think there are very many similarities. I hope those become clear. The second thing I hope will be clear is that we have a lot to learn from you. And that's the reason we're so grateful to have you here. And I'll speak more about that in a moment, but my relationship and our association with Ministry of Ideas, which we at the Religious Literacy Project have the privilege of sponsoring, Zach Davis's wonderful podcast. It's out of that experience of working closely with him that I realize how much we have to learn from him and from people like you. And then the third is, I hope there might be something that we have to offer you that you, I think, probably know, but maybe haven't thought of in a particular way. So I hope those things become clear at the end of these short remarks. So the first thing I think we share is this notion. I love the play on sound education, right? Sound education, and what is sound education? What is education worthy of its name? And the language I would use in that is critical education. I think what we share in our work is a desire that education not be about indoctrination, but be about inspiration. And education can be both, and is a powerful tool in both. But I think all of us in the room, and certainly those of us here at the school, really try. We don't always succeed, but we try to engage in the incredible privilege we have as educators to use our platforms as inspiration as opposed to indoctrination. So that's one thing we share. I think if we then assume the relationship, what is sound education, what is critical education, I think there are three components. The first component is that critical education, sound education, aspires to disrupt assumptions. And not just to challenge or beat people over the head with their ignorance, but rather invite people into what they think they know and invite them into a different understanding of those assumptions. Whether it be about an idea, whether it be about an assumption that they bring as human beings in the world, whether it be about a discipline that they thought they knew, that they're learning something new about. So the notion of disrupting assumption, not for its own sake, but again for the sake of inviting curiosity and imagination and possibility then about the energizing, exciting experience of being a lifelong learner. So disrupting assumptions. And we here at the Divinity School, and especially the work I do at the Religious Literacy Project, because religion is so misunderstood in the popular discourse, we have our work cut out for us. So our work in disrupting the assumptions and inviting people into a more nuanced understanding of religion is what I do 24 hours a day. So I won't go into that, but so this disruption of assumption is something I both really value and also am humbled by. So I think we share that. The second part of what I would call critical education, empowering education, sound education, would be to inspire empathy, to inspire openness to the other that we think of as fearsome or an enemy, but to inspire empathy even again around whole disciplines that we thought we knew and that become excited to learn more about. But this inspiration of empathy is what I think you all really do well, and that we have a lot to learn from you. You all are master storytellers. What you do is always amazing to me in your 10 minutes, your 15 minutes, your 25 minutes. When you produce a podcast episode, you're looking at a narrative arc that is a profound, to me, work of artistry and of storytelling that invites us into whole worlds that we can literally get lost in our 10, 15, 25 minutes of listening to your remarkable work. And I have been the beneficiary of many of your artistic representations. It was through this conference that I started to explore with Zach's guidance some of your incredible work, and I feel really inspired by it and also excited to think what you do with sound, the idea of what it means to think about space and sound and rhythm and how you use music and how you use the soundscape itself that requires the listener to invest in him or herself in what it is you're telling us, then is profoundly changing, a profoundly changing and inspiring experience for me personally, and I know for others. So we have so much to learn from you about the art of narrative that can inspire empathy, and then again, not just disrupt assumptions, but inspire our curiosity about whatever we perceive to be an other. And in these profoundly partisan times, in this deeply distressing global experience that we have now of rising fear, rising hate in public conversation, in public discourse, the need for inspiring empathy, I think, has always been profound, but I think is especially urgent today. The third piece of what I think critical education, sound education can inspire is this notion of empowering agency. the sense that we as individuals actually have so much more power than we often feel like we have, and the sense that our agency actually matters. We are the creators of the cultures. As each of us individually are creators of cultures that can either inspire hope or fear, promise or despair, imagination or a sense of absolute claustrophobia about the realities of our lives. This notion of inspiring agency is for me rooted in a radical sense of hope. And the hope is not itself about religion, although religions can be vehicles for that. For me, it's about a human capacity of believing that our agency matters. And that is something that I think is the third component of radical education, of empowering education, critical education, that is such a critical feature in our current experience, because all of us, I think, we all struggle with a sense of feeling like our individual actions won't matter against this sea of overwhelming cultural experience of fear, against the sea of overwhelming questions like climate change that feel just enormous to us. But the inspiration of individual agency, I think, is a piece that we at the Divinity School try. We fail often, but we try to represent a meaningful, and when I say radical hope, not a naive hope, not a simplistic hope, but a radical hope that actually looks deeply into the realities of our lives and actually says we can do better. And I think that's something that I hope we can offer you. I think many of you do it anyway, but maybe the language around this notion of radical hope and empowering individual agency is something that I'm just curious to hear from you about, whether that feels like work that you are committed to doing and can do through your incredible artistry. And I'm going to end with a parable. I just can't help it. Sorry. And it's actually rooted in like all parables, rooted in both a true story and a fictional account. But the true story is that it's based in a neighborhood, a contemporary U.S. city, a neighborhood in a city, in an urban city, where this particular community of people actually really values a rare thing these days. They have created a culture where they value elders. They value their elder population. And this one particular woman, also still true, represents this value very much so. She's kind of an icon in the community. She's like 100 years old in the telling of this story. She's still quite vigorous. Everyone knows her. She's present in the community. She's out and about. She does things in the community, but she sits on her porch. People pass her a lot, so everyone knows her. And she's, again, venerated for her wisdom, also her compassion and her imagination, and her perseverance. 100 years old, it's not easy. So there's a group of children, however, that are, also this part is still true, a group of children that are not so sure about this woman, and not so sure about this whole valuing of elders. In our day and age, are you kidding? Like, really? We valorize youth, we valorize efficiency, we valorize all kinds of things that seem to counter that valuing of an elder and a sense of wisdom. So they devise a scheme together to trick her, to expose her as not actually so wise at all. And their scheme, 3 boys and a girl, they decide that they're going to capture a bird. And they're going to go to the woman and say, wise woman, I have a bird in my hand. Is this bird dead or alive? And they have schemed, and they said, if she says it's alive, I'll crush it in my hand and open to show her ignorance, expose her ignorance. And if she says it's dead, I'll open my hands and the bird will fly free, again, exposing her short-sighted ignorance. So they are pleased with their plan. After school, they gather themselves, they get ready, they capture a bird along the way. They pass by her house all the time, so she knows them, she recognizes them. But they never come to her house, and so she sees them now coming up her walkway, and she's thrilled. And she's welcoming, she's open-hearted, open arms. She says, children, hello, I'm so happy to see you. Please come in, let me share with you some refreshments. What can I do for you? And they say, no, we just have a quick question. And she senses their cynicism, but she doesn't bow to it. She says, what can I help you with? And they say, wise woman, I have a bird in my hand. Is it alive or is it dead? And she pauses. And she looks at each one of these children, gazing in their eyes. And they then are getting uncomfortable because there's silence, and she's just looking at them curiously, compassionately, and now they're starting to shuffle. They're getting uncomfortable. Come on. Answer our question. We have things to do. Answer our question. So finally, after looking deeply into each one of their eyes, she stands up and she puts her hands around the boy holding the bird. And she says, "My son, the bird is in your hands." How can we, as sound educators, as critical educators, help people know that the bird is in our hands? Each one of us has the capacity for incredible generosity, hope, imagination, or incredible destruction, fear, and death. How do we help inspire one another to take the awesome both responsibility, but to see it also as an opportunity to make the world a better place? Thank you for being with us. Thank you so much for your time. It's our pleasure.
Okay, this is going to be fairly quick because some of these slides got displayed earlier and you probably looked at them, but conference logistics. Some of us have been at Harvard for a while. Some of us have degrees from Harvard. Some of us are students here. Some of us have been here for about 25 minutes. So let's just go over a couple of things very quickly. There's tons of events going on today, and you should have this program. They're all taking place in mainly 3 different buildings, and then later 4 different buildings. And apologies if you already know this, but here we are in Andover. There's going to be most of the talks will be between these 2 buildings, Andover and Divinity. They're very close to one another. And then there are a few events up there in Rockefeller. This evening, we're going to have an evening keynote from 6 to 7 over at the museum. There's going to be signage up there so you can see where to go. There's going to be a reception from 7 to 10:30 p.m. in the museum. It would be advisable to take a break and go back to your hotel and chill out and change clothes maybe beforehand or sometime during then because it's such a long reception. It's a beautiful museum if you've never been there before, a cool place to hang out with other audio geeks. And this is our Saturday schedule, and the only thing you need to know geographically about our Saturday schedule is that Dan Carlin's keynote, if you're interested in watching that, is held at Payne Hall. And it's about half a mile walk from where we are here in Andover Hall. We're going to have a half-hour break between the first round of speakers tomorrow morning and Dan Carlin's talk, so you'll have plenty of time to make it over there if you want. And then there's an hour-and-a-half lunch break afterwards, so you've got some wiggling room to explore and get some food. Lastly, Braun Room, where you registered, it's going to be open this whole time. All of our talks have 15-minute frames on either side, so you can visit and ask questions. Rockefeller is a great place to escape the crowd. It's just north of this building and has some nice open sitting areas with sofas and stuff. You want to use that. Some of these hallways in Andover are a little cramped. Let's see. People are going to be coming and going from panels a lot. This is normal at any conference. Don't take it personally. That doesn't mean that you're boring. And please feel free that when you're setting up for your presentation to record it. Lastly, Patrick Wyman of Tides of History is hosting a meetup at Plow and Star. The address is on there, and that's Saturday night. Some of our listeners are going to be here tomorrow. If you're like me, your listeners sometimes email you and they say, "Hey, if you're ever in my neck of the woods, I'd love to buy you a beer, a cup of tea, or coffee." And so tomorrow night you can say, "All right, folks, line them up." So that's it. There's going to be a panel in here in half an hour, so take your time and chat. It's a panel on classics that I'm moderating, but you've got the schedules. Have fun, guys. Thanks for coming.